now move on to the motion before the House tonight, which is this House regrets the partition of India, and I now look to the first speaker, the librarian, Sabriyah Saeed, Somerville College, to open the case for the proposition.
Thank you, Madam President, honourable members, dear guests. It is a real privilege to be speaking here tonight on this debate. August 14th. Streets bleed green and white. You hear the words, Pakistan Zindabad. August 15th. Streets bleed green and white and orange. You hear the words, Jai Hind. In 1947, trains bleed red and red and red. You hear the words Jai Hind, you hear the words Pakistan Zindabad. On 11th of August 1947, Muhammad Ali Jinnah told us, you are free. You are free to go to your mosques, you are free to go to your temples, or to any other place of worship in the state of Pakistan. Jawaharlal Nehru, on 14th August, told a nation that on the stroke of midnight, they would awake to life and freedom. The year of 1947 for South Asia can largely be defined by the desire for freedom. And yet, this freedom was something in itself which was largely undefined. This freedom was hazy. It was imagined. It did not know its own borders. This freedom would not have recognized itself in its own reflection. Honourable members, I'm here before you tonight to tell you why the partition of India and East and West Pakistan is something to regret. Partition as an actuality in history, as it happened the way it did, is something to regret. But I'll also tell you that I'm not going to suggest that Pakistan and Bangladesh should become a part of a united India again. This is a difficult debate in many ways, as we ask ourselves whether India and East and West Pakistan would have been better off in the long term without the current divisions. This kind of speculative reflection has no correct answers. All we can do now is look at what happened and what happens now. The focus of my argument tonight is primarily historical, and I will leave the intricacies of current political dynamics to our guest speakers, who I am sure better versed than me on this. But I will urge you to consider the borders that are still disputed in Kashmir. 3 wars have been fought over Kashmir post-partition. Consider how we became the pawns of America and the USSR in the Cold War. Consider how we feel about the deep-rooted animosities that still plague India and Pakistan. Before I continue, it falls upon me to introduce the opposition speakers for tonight's debate. Eric Sukumaran is an MBA student from Saeed Business School and the first elected member of the Oxford Union Secretaries Committee. I feel a bit bad for Eric. He must have had a hard time accepting that he has to take orders from myself, a girl 9 years younger than him, but also more senior than him, and more senior than he ever may be on committee. Our second speaker, Salman Khurshid, is the former Minister for External Affairs of India and the former President of Uttar Pradesh Congress Committee. And finally, Mridula Mukherjee is an Indian historian who is known for her work on the role of peasants in the Indian independence movement. It is a pleasure to speak with you all tonight. Madam President, these are your opposition speakers, and they are most welcome. I've thought long and hard about what I would say in this debate tonight, primarily because I knew that should I plan to visit India or Pakistan in the future, my visa status may be a point of difficulty. But as the only Pakistani speaking in this debate tonight, I feel a sense of responsibility. An even greater sense of responsibility now that I've decided to be on the side of the debate, which is not typically or traditionally Pakistani. However, to confine this debate to the dynamic of India versus Pakistan, I think would be ignorant of the nuance and immense complexity of partition. Let's talk about Jinnah for a minute, the founder and first Governor General of Pakistan. Jinnah's idea and vision for Pakistan was not a terrible thing. I think it is often overlooked by mainstream narratives what Pakistan actually meant to the people in 1947. And it did not necessarily mean the territorial borders that we recognize today. Pakistan and Swaraj were words that were hanging in the air. For some, it meant freedom of religious practice. It meant Muslim representation. It meant a Muslim denomination in a centralized post-Raj government. It meant balance. In May 1946, the Cabinet Mission proposed a complex plan to Congress and the Muslim League. In essence, they presented a three-tiered federation government, which gave the League the spirit of Pakistan, as historian Yasmin Khan calls it. And this plan was agreed to by both parties. And for many Muslims, it was enough. But idea and reality can often become disparate and partitioned in themselves. The Cabinet Mission's highly complicated plan was ill-translated to the rest of India, a humongous country. Muslim League supporters thought that they had lost their Pakistan altogether. Rumor, confusion, and chaos meant that this plan collapsed. The Pakistan that was eventually delivered was not the Pakistan of dreams that many people, including Jinnah himself, had envisioned, but rather a moth-eaten version. Jinnah had said that the partition of Punjab and Bengal will be sowing the seeds for future serious trouble. And this word, Pakistan, was also a word of political muddiness. The word fell into the hands of the wrong people. It fell into the hands of those who fear-mongered. It was possessed by politicians. It was possessed by the general election of 1945 and 46, when both Congress and the League almost manically wanted to prove their support and status to British negotiating powers. One of my points today is that the freedom we associate with independence and partition was not on Indian or Pakistani terms. It was perhaps the last laugh of British imperialism, even as they were sweating and recovering from sunburn in their hasty retreat from their former colonial trophy. How can we perceive true freedom when the terms of this freedom were shoddy and predominantly dictated by the British, who had cuffed India in the first place? The British exhibited their last bastion of control by leaving behind a situation which was largely out of control. Archibald Wavell, the former Viceroy of India before Lord Mountbatten, said that it was in Britain's best interest to stand back before lighting the touch paper. And stand back they did. As violence, infernos, and rioting became rampant, they retreated swiftly, more or less unscathed. Surely a handover of power also implies the physical and practical implications of handover. Mountbatten himself, the last Viceroy of India, gave instruction that any remaining British military units were only to be used in emergencies for the British and not for internal conflicts or frontiers. Which brings me to my next point, the logistical and practical disaster that was partition. The date for the transfer of power was initially June 1948. This date was then pushed forward by 10 months to August 1947 by people setting deadlines in the comfort of their own offices in London. How can you split an entire nation, almost 13 times the size of the UK, within a matter of months? How can you do this when local governments are not functioning, when there is a severe lack of personnel, a severe lack of resources, no money facilitating it? Let's also talk about the man himself, who was to decide the new borders, Cyril Radcliffe. So Radcliffe was a British judge by profession, but was no judge when it came to deciding a nation's fate. Now, I've carried out more accurate and thorough research for a 2-day holiday in Europe than the research carried out by Radcliffe in the creation of East and West Pakistan. Radcliffe had never been to India before and was tasked with the job of dividing it. He was there for only 6 weeks. He never visited the areas which he was pulling apart. The statistics he used to create the new map were 6 years out of date and were not checked for mistakes. Cultural, political, and local nuance was not accounted for. He did not account for the fact that the Muhajirs arriving in Sindh would be lost in a population that did not speak Urdu. He did not account for the Muslim majority areas of India, which found themselves hundreds of miles away from the Pakistani border. This disorientation embodies the disaster that was the actuality of partition, and the consequences were not light. The consequences were heavy. They say human bodies feel heavier in death. Trains traveling from Indian Punjab to Lahore carried this unprecedented heaviness of death in bulk. Railway platforms bore witness to human monstrosities. What Radcliffe did not realize at the time, and believe me, he did not realize a lot of things before or after his 6-week gap year in India, but what he didn't realize was that the line he drew across a map was not a line drawn in ink. It was a line drawn in blood. Villages pillaged, women and children brutally raped, violently murdered, blood running through streets like gutter water. Punjab witnessed an ethnic cleansing, limbs torn apart, lovers torn apart, identities distorted. This calamity saw the displacement of approximately 12 million people and the deaths of between 500,000 to 1 million people. This violence was not merciful to anyone of any religion, caste, class, age, or gender. The tragedy of partition cannot be characterized solely by statistics, because the greatest tragedies of partition were the intimate and personal ones that hid in private corners. I spoke to my grandmother on the phone just yesterday about this debate, and she was just a young girl when her family had to leave everything they knew in Indian Punjab and travel across the border on trains. Her own grandmother could not bear the loss, the separation from her home she wouldn't see again. She passed away a year after partition. Whispered and locked away stories, memories forgotten and yet not forgotten. You may say that the wounds of partition are reserved for another generation, and that eventually with time, the sands will shift again and that void it created will escape us. We are, after all, moving into an era where our greatest sources of history will no longer be with us. The opposition will tell you tonight that we shouldn't regret the partition because we need to accept history as a means of moving on and progressing. But inherent to the act of acceptance is acknowledgement. Our act of regretting is our acknowledgement. If we do not acknowledge such a loss of human life, the displacement of so many people and identities as a regret, and that this was not the right vehicle for freedom, how can we progress today? Regret it, because as it happened, it was not truly ours. Regret it for the enemies it made of neighbors. Regret it for the bigotry. Regret it for the human capacity for terror it unleashed. And regret partition for what it was, not what it sought to be. Thank you.